Mountain Man took the bullet for Obese Girl. She lived alone for months until she heard his voice again. $5 for the fat one, the bidder sneered, and the whole of Wolf Creek pretended the wind was louder than its shame. The winter market groaned under hooves and harness. Steam rose from cattlebacks, frost webbed the fence rails, and a rough-built platform stood where men sold what they had no right to own. On it, Genevieve Whitmore, Jenny to the versions of herself that remembered gentler days, tried to keep her breath steady against a collar of cold iron. Rope cut her wrists purple. Her dress was torn, her hair matted with road dust, and her eyes, clear, gray, unbroken, stared past the jeering faces to a sky so bright it made everything below look small. 10, someone called. Laughter crackled, sharp as ice. She'll pull a plow if you feed her scraps. Maxwell Whitmore, the man who'd once taught Jenny to skip stones, grinned with a gambler's hunger and tapped the chain like he was pricing a mule. You're getting a bargain, boys, big bones, big lungs. She'll work. Max, Jenny said, voice raw from pleading, please. He didn't look at her. You lost the right to ask me anything when you ate through our luck. Another hand went up. 7, I'll take her south if she won't mind the heat. Sold, Maxwell began. Release her, a voice said. It didn't shout. It landed, heavy as an axe head. The crowd turned. A man was crossing the trampled yard, boots slow, steps certain, storm in his shoulders. He was enormous, broad as a door, tall enough that the platform didn't give him height. Dark hair bound at his neck, beard thick, eyes like wet earth just before rain. His coat was bear hide. His hands were bare despite the cold, and the air around him felt different, as if the wind had decided to move out of his way. "Who are you to interrupt a lawful sale?" Maxwell demanded, swagger wavering. "Gabriel Blackwood," the man said. "Gabe, if you need it shorter." His gaze never left the iron ring at Jenny's throat. "And this isn't lawful. It's cowardice." Snickers. "Mountain Man's got opinions." Gabe stepped closer, the platform boards creaking under his weight, though he wasn't even on them. "Take the collar off," he said to Maxwell, voice calm enough to frighten. "Now." Maxwell lifted his chin, felt the crowd press behind him like a bad idea. "She's my property." "She's your sister," Gabe answered, and the word cut through the cold like a bell. "Not any more," Maxwell spat, dragging at the chain. "Bids at 7. The chain went slack. It took Jenny a heartbeat to understand that Gabe's hand had closed around it and simply taken it. The links squealed, the ring clattered, and then his other hand, gentle, impossibly, lifted the iron from her throat. He slipped his coat from his own shoulders and wrapped it around hers, covering rope burns and shaking. "Can you stand?" he asked, eyes on her, not the men. She nodded because he believed she could. A pistol scraped leather. Maxwell's face had gone from red to white. "You don't get to—" The flash was small in daylight. The sound was not. Gabe moved faster than something that size should. He turned, drawing Jenny into his chest, and the bullet met him instead of her. It punched through bare hide and flesh with a thud that emptied the yard of laughter. He staggered, exhaled once, and stayed on his feet. For a breathless instant, nobody moved. Then chaos broke. Shouts, a scuffle, a good man from the crowd wrenching the gun from Maxwell's hand. Jenny felt warmth spreading across her cheek and realized it was his blood, not hers. Gabe's mouth twitched like a man weighing pain and choosing forward anyway. "We're leaving," he told her. and there was no world in which she didn't believe him. He lifted her, effortless, certain, and carried her through the parted bodies toward a waiting roan. Behind them, the market found its courage too late. Ahead, the road shouldered into pines, white and blinding. "Hold on," he said, voice rough but steady, as he swung into the saddle with her cradled to him. She did. To him, to the coat that smelled of wood smoke, to the one truth she'd been given in a year of lies. Someone had finally chosen her over a price. The horse thundered through the frozen pines, hooves cutting a rhythm against the snow that sounded like a heartbeat, loud, steady, alive. Jenny clung to Gabe's coat, her fingers buried in the thick fur, her cheek pressed to his chest. Every jolt made him grunt softly, but he never slowed. When they finally reached a small clearing by the river, the mountain man reined in the roan and dismounted with care. His face was pale under the beard, breath heavy, but his voice stayed calm. "We'll stop here," he said, lowering her gently onto a patch of moss. Jenny's eyes widened when she saw the dark stain spreading across his side. "You're bleeding." "It's not the first time," he muttered, cutting the saddle straps free with his knife. "Won't be the last." She reached for him, panic breaking through her exhaustion. "Please, let me help." He looked at her, then really looked, and saw not fear, but determination. Her face was dirty, her dress torn, but her gaze was steady. "You know how? I took care of my mother when she was sick. I can do this." He hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Then do it quick." She tore a strip from her skirt, pressed it to the wound. His jaw clenched, veins standing out in his neck, but he didn't pull away. "You shouldn't have to see this." "I've seen worse," she whispered, though she hadn't. Snow began to fall again, soft and relentless. When she was done, Gabe leaned against a tree, breathing hard. "We'll move when the bleeding stops. My cabin's 5 miles north." "Cabin?" "Where I live," he said simply, "far from people who've forgotten how to be human." She almost smiled through the tears that wouldn't stop. "Then I suppose I'm human again, thanks to you." He didn't answer. He only adjusted the bandage she'd made and built a small fire, his big hands moving with quiet precision. When the flames caught, the warmth spread through the clearing, melting the frost from her lashes. For the first time in years, Jenny felt something like safety. The journey to the cabin took 2 more hours. Gabe walked beside the horse the whole way, one hand steady on the reins, the other pressed to his wounded side. He never once complained. When they reached the clearing high above the valley, Jenny saw the place that would change her life. A sturdy log cabin, half buried in snow, with smoke curling from a stone chimney. A small corral, a stack of chopped wood, and the faint light of a lantern glowing in the window. Home. He helped her down, his strength waning. "Inside," he said. The warmth inside the cabin hit her like a memory she didn't know she'd lost. The scent of pine and smoke, the hum of the fire, the rough-hewn table scattered with tools and carved wood figures, wolves, eagles, even a small bear. Jenny turned slowly, her eyes wide. "You live here alone?" Gabe nodded, shrugging off his coat with a groan. "Always have." "Why?" He tossed the coat aside, sat heavily by the fire. "Because people take more than they give. Mountains don't." She knelt beside him, refastening the bandage that had soaked through. "You took a bullet for me," she said quietly. "I couldn't let him shoot you. But you didn't even know me." He met her eyes. "Didn't have to." The simplicity of it broke something inside her. For years she had been judged, ridiculed, sold like a burden. And here was a man who saw her, not her weight, not her shame, just her. She swallowed hard. "Thank you." He said nothing, only nodded, eyes already drooping from exhaustion. When his head tilted forward, she caught it gently, easing him onto the bed by the wall. "Rest," she whispered. "I'll keep watch." He didn't argue. When the fire dimmed, she sat beside him, listening to the storm outside. Each time he breathed, she matched her breath to his, as if keeping him alive with rhythm alone. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of silence. Outside, the mountains slept beneath snow. Inside, a woman who had been treated like an animal, and a man who had forgotten his own humanity, found warmth neither of them expected. He had saved her life. She had already begun saving his. By dawn, the storm had gentled into silence. The world outside the cabin was white and endless. Snow draped over trees, fences, even the old trapline that wound down toward the frozen creek. Inside, the fire had burned low, painting soft amber light across the room. Jenny woke to its flicker and the sound of Gabe's labored breathing. He was sweating despite the cold, his brow pale beneath the dark beard. She was by his side before she even realized she'd moved. "Gabe," she whispered, "you need water." He stirred but didn't open his eyes. "Already took enough trouble from you?" Her heart clenched. "You saved me. Let me return the favor." He smiled faintly, too weak for argument. She fetched a tin cup, melted snow over the fire, and helped him drink. When his hand brushed hers, it was burning hot. Fever. She stayed by him all morning, cooling his skin with damp cloths, whispering things she didn't even know she believed anymore. Things like, "You're safe, you'll get better, I won't let you go." Outside, the mountains held their breath. Teatra? 3 days later, his fever broke. He woke clear-eyed, hungry, and stubborn. "You should have left me by the river," he rasped as she fed him soup. She set the spoon down hard. "Don't you ever say that again." He blinked, startled by her tone. "I've been left enough for one lifetime," she said softly. "You're not leaving me, too." Something flickered behind his eyes, guilt, maybe, or recognition. "You've got fire," he said finally. "Didn't expect that." "Neither did I." They both laughed then, awkward but genuine, and something in the cabin shifted. It felt less like a hiding place, more like a beginning. When Gabe was strong enough to move, he insisted on showing her around the valley. "This way," he said, holding out his hand. "Careful, the snow's slick near the ridge." Jenny hesitated at the doorway. She hadn't walked freely in months. Years, really. Her body still carried the weight of humiliation, the memory of people staring, laughing, judging. But Gabe didn't look at her like that. He looked like a man inviting someone into his world, not out of pity, but respect. She took his hand. The air outside was sharp, clean, honest. They walked slowly, him steadying her when the snow shifted, her laughing when she nearly tripped. Down the hill, the valley opened wide, the river gleaming like glass. Deer tracks cut across the meadow, and high above, a hawk traced lazy circles against the sky. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Gabe nodded. "Hard to hate yourself when you're surrounded by this. The mountain doesn't care what shape you are, how much you weigh, or who sold you. It just asks if you'll survive." She looked at him, her throat tight. "I want to." "Then you will." Days turned into weeks. They fell into rhythm, quiet, simple, almost sacred. Gabe hunted and chopped wood. Jenny cooked and mended and kept the fire alive. In the evenings they'd sit by the hearth, she knitting, he carving shapes into wood. One night she asked, "Why do you carve?" He shrugged. "Hands need work when the heart's thinking too much." He handed her a small figure, a bear with its cub. The lines were rough but careful, full of tenderness. "For me?" He nodded. "You remind me of her." "Of who?" "The cub. Doesn't know she's strong yet." The words sank deep. For the first time, she didn't flinch when someone called her strong. Winter melted into early spring. The snow thinned, streams cracked open, and the valley came alive with color. Gabe taught her how to fish, how to mend traps, how to build a fire in wet wood. Jenny, in turn, taught him the quiet art of home, how to bake bread, how to patch a coat, how to make tea from dried mint. One evening, after they'd eaten, Gabe sat by the door sharpening his knife while Jenny cleaned the table. The firelight caught his profile, scarred, weathered, yet peaceful. "You ever miss people?" she asked. He thought for a long moment. "Not the kind I knew." "And the kind you didn't?" He smiled a little. "Maybe one or two. You, for example, if you ever decided to leave." The words startled her more than she expected. "I'm not leaving." He turned to her, eyes soft but searching. "You sure about that?" She took a slow breath. "I've spent half my life running from who I am. I don't want to run from where I belong." He nodded once, as if sealing an unspoken promise. That night, the wind rose outside, whispering through the pines. Jenny couldn't sleep. She got up quietly, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and found Gabe still awake by the dying fire. "Couldn't rest?" he asked. She shook her head. "When it's quiet like this, I keep hearing things. The market, the shouting, the laughter." Gabe's voice was low. "Memories don't leave easy. You just have to give them new ground to stand on." She sat beside him. "And if I can't?" He turned toward her, his gaze steady. "Then I'll stand with you until you can." Something in her chest broke open, a kind of ache that felt more like hope. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and for once, she didn't apologize for taking up space. Outside, snow began to fall again, light and slow. Inside, two souls scarred by the world shared a silence that was anything but empty. Spring deepened, and with it came a rhythm so natural that neither Jenny nor Gabe needed to name it. The days started with the same sound, the crackle of firewood and the hiss of boiling water. Sometimes Jenny woke first, sometimes Gabe. Either way, one would always find the other already at work, him repairing a snare or chopping wood, her tending dough or humming softly over the stew pot. The cabin, once built for one, now breathed like it had been waiting for two. Everywhere Jenny's touch lingered, fresh flowers tucked into a mason jar, new curtains she'd sewn from old linen sacks, clean blankets folded neatly at the end of the bed. Gabe had never known what comfort smelled like until the day her bread filled the air with warmth. "You've turned this place into something dangerous," he said one morning, sitting by the door with his coffee. "Dangerous?" she teased, wiping flour from her cheek. He nodded. "Feels like home." The words hung in the air, simple yet too big to swallow. That spring, Gabe began teaching her what he called the honest ways to live. He showed her how to tell where the river would flood by watching where moss grew thickest. He taught her to trap rabbits without cruelty, to recognize herbs that healed and those that burned. She learned fast, her hands clumsy at first, but determined. One afternoon, while trying to split a log, the axe slipped and nearly caught her foot. Gabe was beside her in a heartbeat, his large hand closing around the handle before it fell. "Easy," he said, steadying her. His palm was rough against hers, but his touch was careful. "You don't need to fight the wood. Let the weight do the work." She met his eyes and realized they were the color of wet earth after rain, dark, steady, impossible to look away from. "Like this?" she asked softly. He stepped behind her, guiding her grip. "Like that." The axe fell clean through the log. The sound rang sharp and satisfying, echoing across the valley. When she turned to smile at him, his hand still rested over hers, and neither of them moved. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the beams above the bed she'd made for herself in the corner. She could hear Gabe outside, tending the fire pit, the steady scrape of his knife on wood. For years, she had prayed to feel invisible. Now she wanted nothing more than to be seen, and somehow, with him, she already was. Days folded into weeks. They built new fences, planted a small garden near the stream. Jenny found joy in small things again. The smell of pine sap, the chill of river water on her skin, the way the cabin glowed golden at dusk. Sometimes, when Gabe returned from a hunt, she'd meet him at the door with a shy smile and a towel for his hands. He always said the same thing. "Smells better in here than any place I've ever been." Once, she caught him looking at her differently, not with pity, but with quiet admiration. She had been hanging laundry by the river, the sunlight catching her hair, her laugh carrying through the trees. He stood still for a long moment before looking away. That night, he carved something by the fire and didn't show her what it was. Summer came, green and gentle. Gabe built a second chair for the porch, saying only, "One chair looks lonely." They'd sit there in the evenings, listening to the wind comb through the pines. Sometimes he'd talk about his childhood near the Missouri River, about losing his parents young and finding the mountains instead of a family. Other nights, they said nothing at all, and it was enough. "Why did you come up here?" Jenny asked once. He thought for a long while. "Because down there, everything I loved died or was taken. Up here, nothing asks more than I can give." She nodded. "And now?" He turned his head slowly, eyes soft. "Now it asks a little more." One afternoon, Jenny found the courage to ask what had haunted her since that winter day. "Why did you take the bullet for me?" He paused mid-swing, the axe glinting in the sunlight. "Because I couldn't watch another good soul be destroyed by men who thought they were worth more." She swallowed. "But I wasn't worth dying for." Gabe leaned the axe against the stump, wiped sweat from his brow, and met her eyes squarely. "Don't ever say that again." Something in his tone silenced the doubt in her chest. That evening, after supper, she noticed a small object on her plate, a wooden carving, unfinished, but unmistakably her, round, gentle, strong. Her eyes welled. "You made this?" He nodded awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Didn't mean for you to see it yet." "It's beautiful," he shrugged, just trying to remember what peace looks like. She reached across the table and took his hand. "Then keep looking. he didn't pull away. The first time he laughed, truly laughed, was weeks later when she burned the stew. "I told you not to turn your back on the pot," he teased, grinning as she fanned the smoke. "And I told you I was checking the firewood," she shot back, coughing through laughter. He shook his head, took the spoon from her, and ladled the charred stew into bowls. "Still better than anything I've made." "Liar." He raised his spoon in mock salute. "To survival." "To survival," she echoed, though her heart whispered something deeper. The summer nights grew softer, the air thick with the scent of wild flowers. One evening, they sat by the riverbank watching the stars bloom across the sky. The fire crackled low, their shoulders brushing. "Do you ever think about leaving the mountain?" she asked. "Not any more," he said. "Why not?" He looked at her then, his voice low. "Because everything I've ever needed found me here." She felt her breath catch, the stars blurred behind her tears, and for the first time since the day she'd been sold like an animal, Genevieve Whitmore smiled without pain. The mountains had given her back her name, and the man beside her, without asking for anything, had given her a reason to keep it. By late summer, peace had settled into the cabin so deeply it almost felt permanent. The garden thrived, the river sang, and the laughter between Jenny and Gabe grew easier, warmer, like they'd known each other far longer than a single season. But nothing in the mountains stayed still for long. It began with a knock. No one ever came that far up the ridge. The sound startled even the horses outside. Gabe froze mid-step, his hand instinctively finding the rifle by the door. "Stay here," he said quietly. Jenny obeyed, though her heart hammered. She peered from behind the stove as he opened the door a crack. A stranger stood outside, thin, tired, carrying the dust of miles on his coat. He wore a deputy's badge, tarnished but real. "Gabriel Blackwood?" the man asked. Gabe's voice was low. "Used to be." The deputy glanced over his shoulder, uneasy. "You've got a woman living here. She's wanted back in Wolf Creek." Gabe stiffened. "Wanted?" "Her brother's stirring trouble. Claims she stole money before she ran. There's talk of a reward for her return." Jenny's breath caught. Gabe's jaw flexed. "Her brother sold her like cattle. I was there." The deputy nodded. "I heard. Some believe him, some don't. But the sheriff's eager to look like he's cleaning up his town." Gabe's grip tightened on the rifle. "Tell the sheriff if he comes up this mountain, he'll leave lighter than he arrived." The deputy hesitated, reading the conviction in his eyes, then tipped his hat. "Fair warning given. I'd leave soon if I were you." He turned, disappeared into the trees. Gabe shut the door, bolting it behind him. For a long time, neither spoke. The fire crackled. The wind moved softly under the eaves. Finally, Jenny said, "He'll come?" "Yes." She swallowed. "Then we run." Gabe shook his head. "No, we don't run any more." That night, while she washed dishes, he sat sharpening his knife by the fire. She could feel the tension radiating off him. Quiet, deliberate, dangerous. "You've done this before," she said. He looked up slowly. "What do you mean?" "You move like a man who's fought too many times and doesn't want to again." He set the knife down, leaned forward. The firelight carved his face into planes of shadow. "I used to be a soldier, then a hunter, sometimes for animals, sometimes for men. I thought I could build peace on top of blood, but it doesn't hold." She turned from the sink, drying her hands. "Is that why you came here?" He nodded. A man can disappear in the mountains. I thought that was enough. And now? His eyes softened. Now I'm not sure disappearing's what I want anymore. She sat across from him, the space between them small but full. Because of me? He didn't answer, but she didn't need him to. The next few days passed under a sky that refused to choose between rain and thunder. Gabe prepared quietly, checking his traps, stacking firewood, cleaning the rifle twice over. Jenny watched him, torn between fear and awe. "Do you think they'll really come?" she asked. "Yes." "Are you afraid?" He looked at her, a hint of a smile ghosting his mouth. "Not for me." That night, as the wind howled through the valley, Jenny lay awake listening to him breathe. She thought of the market, the collar, the chain, of how easily the world had stripped her of dignity, and how gently this man had given it back. She knew then what she hadn't dared to admit. She loved him. The next morning, while gathering water from the stream, she found something half buried in the mud, a folded piece of parchment sealed with wax. Her heart froze as she opened it. Warrant of arrest. Genevieve Whitmore. Theft, deceit, evasion of debt. At the bottom, a name she recognized in bitter handwriting, Maxwell Whitmore. He'd signed the affidavit himself. She carried the paper back to the cabin with shaking hands. "He lied," she whispered, voice trembling. "He's trying to destroy me again." Gabe took the warrant from her, his expression unreadable. "He won't. He'll come for me, he always does." "Let him." She stared at him. "You'll kill him?" "If he steps on this land, I'll stop him." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I don't want you to die for me again." He stepped forward, his hand cupping her face. "Then stop thinking it's dying. Maybe it's just finally living for something that matters." She pressed her forehead to his chest, sobbing softly. "I can't lose you." "You won't," he whispered. "Not unless I have to make sure you get to live." That evening, rain fell steady. Gabe loaded his rifle, his revolver, and the small shotgun by the door. Jenny followed him everywhere, refusing to be sent to bed. "Let me help," he smiled sadly. "You already have. You gave me something to fight for. Then let me stand beside you." He turned to her fully, hands on her shoulders. "You don't owe me bravery." "But I want to be brave," she said, "for you." He hesitated, then nodded once. "If they come, stay low. Don't shoot unless I tell you." "I understand." "Good." He leaned in and kissed her forehead, lingering. "Whatever happens, Jenny, know you were the one thing I got right." The thunder rolled again, closer this time. As night fell, she saw movement down the valley, lanterns flickering between trees. Gabe lifted the rifle to his shoulder, eyes narrowing. "They're here." "Maxwell?" "Yes, and he's not alone." He turned to her one last time. "Remember what I said?" She nodded, heart pounding, fear and love crashing inside her like storm water against rock. Outside, hooves thundered, voices shouted. The mountain went quiet. Then Gabe stepped into the darkness, rifle raised, ready to defend the woman he had saved and the life she had built with him. The storm broke just as they reached the cabin. Lightning split the sky in jagged veins, painting the pines silver white for a heartbeat at a time. Through the rain, Jenny saw them, 5 riders in long coats, guns at their hips, led by the man she'd once called brother. Maxwell Whitmore dismounted, his hat low, his smile mean. "There she is," he shouted over the thunder. My runaway pig!" Jenny flinched. Gabe stepped in front of her, the rifle steady in his hands. "You'll say one more word like that and choke on your own teeth." Maxwell laughed, gesturing to his men. "You think you can scare me, mountain man? I got law on my side." "The law ends where decency dies," Gabe said, voice low and calm. "You sold your sister. There's no law left for you." "Doesn't matter," Maxwell sneered. "She's property. Mine to sell, mine to take back. Step aside, or I'll take her over your dead body." Gabe's eyes didn't waver. "Then start digging." The first gunshot came from Maxwell's side. Gabe moved before Jenny could scream. The rifle cracked, dropping one man instantly. He rolled behind a fallen log, reloaded in one motion. Another flash, another man fell. "Stay down!" he shouted over his shoulder, but Jenny couldn't. She crawled toward the window, clutching the small shotgun he'd left her. Her hands shook, but her eyes were clear. She could see Maxwell behind his men, shouting orders, his pistol gleaming in the rain. "Burn the place if you have to!" he roared. Rage flared inside her like wildfire. This was the man who'd chained her, sold her, stripped her humanity. And Gabe, this man who had given her safety, respect, love, was out there risking his life again because of him. Not this time. She took aim, waited for the lightning, and pulled the trigger. The blast tore through the storm, grazing Maxwell's arm. He screamed, ducking for cover. "Jenny, no!" Gabe called out. But it was too late. The gunfire doubled in reply. Bullets shattered the window, glass raining down around her. Gabe ran back, shielding her with his body, returning fire through the smoke and rain. "Don't you dare die for me again," she cried. He met her eyes for a heartbeat. "I'm not dying for you. I'm living because of you." Then he was gone again, out the door, into the storm. The fight lasted minutes that felt like hours. When it ended, 3 of Maxwell's men were dead, 1 wounded and running into the trees. Only Maxwell remained, limping, blood running down his sleeve. Gabe advanced slowly, revolver aimed steady. "Drop it, Whitmore." Maxwell laughed, half mad. "You think you won? She's still a curse, fat, worthless, unlovable. She'll drag you down like she did our family." Gabe didn't blink. "Funny thing, Maxwell. Seems she's the only thing that ever lifted me up." Maxwell raised his gun. But Gabe was faster. A single shot rang through the valley. Maxwell fell backward into the mud, eyes open, the rain washing his face clean of everything except the emptiness he'd carried all his life. Gabe stood for a long moment, chest heaving, rain and smoke curling around him. Then he dropped the gun and turned back toward the cabin. Jenny met him halfway, running through the downpour. She threw her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. "It's over," she whispered. "It's finally over." He held her tight, his body trembling with exhaustion. "You're free now." She pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. "We both are." Lightning flared behind them, and for a moment the world seemed washed clean. Their pain, their fear, all burned away in that storm. When they finally went inside, the fire still glowed, soft and steady. Gabe hung his rifle above the door, wiped the rain from her hair, and whispered, "You're safe here. You always will be." And for the first time in her life, Jenny believed it. The next morning, the storm had passed. Sunlight poured through the clouds, soft and golden, falling over the cabin like a benediction. Steam rose from the soaked earth, and the valley glowed with that strange, quiet beauty that only comes after violence. Jenny woke before Gabe. For a moment, she simply watched him, his face peaceful in sleep, The hard lines of pain softened. His hand, rough and scarred, still held hers even in dreams. She slipped outside barefoot, letting the wet grass cool her feet. The air smelled of pine, smoke, and new beginnings. Down the ridge, the river shimmered. Everything felt alive again. For months, she had lived in fear of being found, of losing what little she had gained. But now the silence around her didn't feel empty. It felt earned. She turned and saw Gabe in the doorway, leaning against the frame, the sun catching the silver in his beard. "You should be resting," she said gently. "I will," he said, his voice still gravel but tender. "Just didn't want to miss the morning." They stood in the field, the light painting the world in gold. Gabe walked to her, slow but sure, and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "You know," he murmured, "for a man who spent his life alone, I don't think I could ever go back to silence now." She smiled faintly, leaning into him. "Then don't." He chuckled softly. "You make it sound easy." "Maybe it is," she said. "We've already survived the hard parts." They stood that way for a long time, listening to the wind in the trees and the distant rush of the river. Finally Gabe said, "When winter comes again, we'll have to fix the roof, build a stronger fence, maybe even add a room." "A room?" He smiled. "For whatever comes next?" Her breath caught. "You mean," he nodded, "whatever we build together, life, love, maybe a family, but only if you want it." Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from something softer. Peace. "I want it. I want all of it." He turned her gently, brushed the hair from her face, and kissed her. Slow, certain, full of everything they'd both lost and found again. When they parted, Jenny whispered, "Do you think the world will ever forgive us for being happy?" Gabe smiled, the kind of smile that comes from deep inside a man who has known too much grief. "The world doesn't have to. The mountain already did." They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, the sunlight trailing behind them, and as the door closed, the sound of the wind through the pines seemed to whisper their promise, not an ending, but a beginning. Every time a story like this reaches you, somewhere in the world, it carries the same heartbeat, the belief that love can rise even from ruin. Gabe and Jenny's story isn't just about survival, it's about choosing kindness when the world offers cruelty, about finding a home in someone's heart when you've lost every other place. If you're listening tonight, tell me, where are you hearing this story from? And if you still believe love can heal the deepest wounds, stay close, because the next story will remind you miracles still happen in the mountains.